The sound of champagne glasses clinking filled the grand ballroom at the Riverside Country Club in Connecticut, their crystalline notes mixing with the elegant string quartet that played softly near the altar decorated with white roses and baby's breath. Approximately 150 guests mingled in designer clothing, their conversations a low hum of congratulations and well wishes. "Call 911. Someone call 911 right now." The panicked voice cut through the celebration like a knife through silk. Sarah Martinez, 42 years old and 8 months pregnant with her first viable pregnancy in 5 years, lay unconscious on the polished marble floor. Her carefully styled dark hair had come loose from its elegant updo, spreading around her pale face like spilled ink. The navy blue maternity dress she had chosen specifically for what she believed was a close family friend's wedding reception was now wrinkled beneath her, her designer handbag scattered beside her along with its contents. Through the crowd of panicked wedding guests, a man in an expensive charcoal gray suit pushed forward with obvious reluctance. David Martinez, her millionaire husband of 20 years and the CEO of Martinez Construction Empire, knelt beside her with an expression that seemed more annoyed than genuinely concerned for his wife's well-being. She's pregnant with my child," David stammered to the arriving paramedics, his usual corporate executive confidence nowhere to be found. His hands trembled slightly as he loosened his silk tie, and perspiration beaded on his forehead, despite the air-conditioned comfort of the ballroom. From across the elegantly appointed room, near the elaborate wedding cake decorated with cascading sugar flowers, a young woman in a flowing white wedding dress shrieked in a voice that carried the unmistakable accent of Southern California. "This is supposed to be our day. Why is she even here? You promised me she wouldn't find out until we were already on our honeymoon." The paramedic who responded to the emergency call was Dr. Richard Williams, a seasoned emergency medical responder with 23 years of experience and graying temples that spoke to his extensive work in crisis situations. He had learned over the years to recognize when something wasn't quite right about a domestic situation, and every instinct he possessed was currently sending up red flags about this particular emergency call. "Ma'am, can you hear me? You're safe now. My name is Dr. Williams, and I'm here to help you," he said in the calm, professional tone that had comforted thousands of patients over his career. Sarah's eyelids fluttered open slowly, confusion clouding her brown eyes as she tried to focus on the face above her. The fog that had been affecting her thinking for months seemed thicker than usual, making it difficult to process her surroundings or understand how she had ended up on the floor of what appeared to be an unfamiliar venue. "David, what is this place? I thought we were going to the Thompson wedding at Sacred Heart Church. This doesn't look like Sacred Heart at all. Where are we, Dr.?" Williams exchanged a meaningful glance with his partner, EMT Jennifer Rodriguez, who was checking Sarah's vital signs with practiced efficiency. In his 2 decades of emergency response work, Dr. Williams had developed an ability to read situations that went far beyond medical symptoms, and something about this entire scenario felt wrong. "Ma'am, you collapsed at a wedding ceremony here at the Riverside Country Club, but you seem quite disoriented about your location and the circumstances. We're going to transport you to Hartford Hospital immediately to make sure both you and your baby are safe and healthy." As Sarah was carefully lifted onto the stretcher and prepared for transport, she caught a glimpse through her peripheral vision of David arguing intensely with the young bride near the elaborate floral arrangements that decorated the reception area. Their body language spoke of intimate familiarity rather than casual acquaintance, and their heated, whispered conversation suggested a relationship that went far deeper than employer and employee. "David, aren't you coming with me to the hospital?" Sarah called weakly from the stretcher, her voice barely audible over the continued murmur of concerned wedding guests. "I'll meet you there, sweetheart. I just need to handle a few things here first," he replied without making direct eye contact, his attention clearly focused on the crisis management required by Sarah's unexpected appearance at what was supposed to be his secret wedding ceremony. The bride, who appeared to be approximately 28 years old with professionally styled blonde hair and expertly applied makeup, stepped closer to David with obvious agitation. Her white dress was clearly expensive, probably costing more than most people's monthly salary, and her diamond jewelry caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. "You promised me she wouldn't find out about us until after our honeymoon in Costa Rica. How did she even know about this wedding? You told me you sent her to that other wedding across town. Sarah's world began spinning as the horrible reality started penetrating through the medication-induced fog that had been affecting her cognitive function for months. The white wedding dress, the intimate setting, the way David and this woman stood together with the comfortable familiarity of people who had been planning a life together. "Sir, are you planning to accompany your wife to the hospital?" Dr. Williams asked with pointed emphasis, his professional demeanor masking his growing suspicion about the domestic situation he was observing. "I said I'll meet her there shortly," David snapped with obvious irritation, then caught himself and attempted to soften his tone when he realized how his response sounded to the medical professionals and remaining wedding guests. "Please, just take good care of her. I'll be right behind the ambulance." As the ambulance doors slammed shut with a decisive metallic clang, Sarah felt a strange mixture of physical relief from the medical attention and emotional devastation from the dawning realization of what she had just witnessed. The medication-induced mental fog that had been plaguing her daily life for the past several months seemed to be lifting slightly, but the increased clarity brought with it a terrifying understanding of her true situation. Through the small rectangular window in the ambulance door, she watched David wrap his arms around the bride in what appeared to be a comforting embrace, holding her close as she cried into his shoulder. It was the same protective, soothing gesture he used to offer Sarah during the early years of their marriage, back when she still believed their 20-year relationship meant something substantial and lasting. Dr. Williams monitored her vital signs during the 15-minute ride to Hartford Hospital, noting her elevated blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, and the slight tremor in her hands that suggested something beyond simple pregnancy-related fainting. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some important medical questions. Have you been feeling unusually tired or confused lately? Any significant memory problems or difficulty concentrating on simple tasks?" Sarah thought carefully about the past several months, trying to piece together the fragments of her recent experiences through the persistent mental haze. The constant fatigue that she had attributed to the challenges of pregnancy at her age, the way even simple household tasks seemed overwhelming and confusing, how she frequently lost track of conversations in the middle of sentences, and the increasing difficulty she had been experiencing with basic decision-making. "Yes, actually, I thought it was just pregnancy brain. You know, the kind of mental fogginess that many older mothers experience. But it's been getting progressively worse over the past few months. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a thick fog where nothing makes complete sense." "When would you say these symptoms first became noticeable?" "Maybe 3 or 4 months ago, around the time David started being so incredibly attentive about my prenatal vitamin regimen. He began bringing them to me every single morning with my breakfast, along with a large glass of orange juice. He said he wanted to make absolutely sure I didn't forget to take them in my condition." She paused, a chill running down her spine as the implications began to dawn on her. "He became almost obsessive about my nutrition and medication schedule." Dr. Williams made detailed notes on his tablet and radioed ahead to Hartford Hospital with information that would prove crucial to Sarah's treatment and the investigation that would follow. "Hartford emergency. This is Rescue 23 with an incoming pregnant female, 38 weeks gestation, collapse with possible altered mental status and suspected domestic situation. Requesting immediate toxicology screen, psychiatric consultation, and social worker involvement upon arrival." As the ambulance navigated through the late afternoon Connecticut traffic, weaving between cars with its emergency lights flashing, Sarah closed her eyes and attempted to piece together the fragmented memories from the past few months. The increasingly frequent business dinners that kept David away from home until late in the evening, sometimes not returning until after midnight. The way he had begun subtly discouraging her from driving anywhere alone, suggesting that her condition made it dangerous for her to be behind the wheel. The gradual but persistent suggestions that perhaps she should consider seeing a mental health professional about what he described as her increasing anxiety and irrational behavior. Most disturbing of all was her growing realization that she had absolutely no memory of receiving a wedding invitation for any Thompson family celebration. In fact, the more she tried to remember how she had learned about today's supposed wedding ceremony, the more she realized that she couldn't recall any specific conversation, phone call, or written invitation that had informed her about the event. The ambulance pulled into Hartford Hospital's emergency bay with a smooth deceleration, and Sarah was immediately wheeled into Trauma Room 3, where a full medical team was waiting to assess her condition. As the nurses began drawing blood for comprehensive testing and the resident physician started her preliminary examination, she could hear Dr. Williams speaking quietly but urgently to the attending physician just outside the curtained area. Possible domestic abuse situation. Dr. Patterson, the husband didn't accompany his pregnant wife in the ambulance, seemed more concerned about damage control at the wedding venue than his wife's medical condition. Patient reports months of increasing confusion and memory problems. Something about her presentation and the circumstances just doesn't sit right with my experience. As Nurse Thompson drew multiple vials of blood for what Sarah would later learn was an extensive toxicology screening, Sarah stared at the fluorescent lights humming overhead and wondered how many other warning signs she had missed. Explained away, or simply accepted without question over the past months and possibly years. How many times had she ignored that persistent inner voice telling her something was wrong before finally realizing she should have trusted her instincts all along? How many red flags had she systematically dismissed because she desperately wanted to continue believing in the fairy tale version of love and marriage that she had been living for 2 decades? The medical team worked with quiet efficiency around her, checking fetal heart tones, monitoring her blood pressure, and preparing for what Dr. Williams had already suspected would be a complex case involving more than simple pregnancy complications. For the first time in months, despite her physical discomfort and emotional confusion, Sarah felt a small spark of genuine alertness cutting through the persistent mental fog. Whatever was about to unfold in the coming hours, whatever devastating truths were about to emerge from the medical tests and investigation, she sensed intuitively that her old life was ending. The life where she had been the devoted, trusting wife of a successful millionaire husband, living in their beautiful Westport mansion and looking forward to raising their child together, was dissolving around her like sugar in rain. And despite the overwhelming fear and uncertainty about what lay ahead, despite not knowing how she would possibly navigate the challenges that seemed to be approaching, a small but growing part of her felt something she hadn't experienced in months: relief. Relief that the confusion might finally have an explanation. Relief that her instincts about something being terribly wrong hadn't been the product of pregnancy-induced paranoia. And relief that whatever happened next, at least she would finally know the truth about what had been happening to her life, her mind, and her marriage. 3 hours earlier, Sarah had been standing in the nursery of their 6-bedroom Westport mansion, carefully folding tiny baby clothes with the kind of reverent attention that women who have experienced pregnancy loss bring to preparing for a new child. The room was painted in soft butter yellow, a gender-neutral choice for the surprise they had decided to wait to discover, with white furniture that David had insisted on purchasing from the most expensive baby boutique in Greenwich. She paused in her folding to look out the large bay window that offered a panoramic view of their impeccably manicured grounds. The estate sprawled across 3 acres of prime Connecticut real estate, complete with a swimming pool, tennis court, and gardens that required a full-time landscaping crew to maintain. 22 years ago, when she first met David Martinez at the age of 20, she never could have imagined living in such opulent luxury. Sarah had been fresh from college then, armed with a degree in English literature from Connecticut College and dreams of becoming a published novelist. The temporary secretarial position at Martinez Construction had been intended as nothing more than a way to pay her student loans and cover basic living expenses while she worked on her writing in the evenings and weekends. David had been 35 at the time, already established as the CEO of what he claimed was his family's 3rd-generation construction empire. He presented himself as charming, successful, and most importantly to her young and somewhat naive self, genuinely interested in her thoughts, dreams, and intellectual aspirations. Their courtship had been conducted like something from a romantic movie, filled with expensive dinners at the finest restaurants in Hartford and New Haven, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, and the kind of lavish attention that made Sarah feel like the most important woman in the world. "Sarah, you're far too intelligent and talented to waste away in some corporate cubicle, typing other people's correspondence and filing their documents," he had told her over dinner at the exclusive Riverside Yacht Club, the same venue where they would eventually hold their wedding reception. "Let me take care of all the practical concerns about money and security. You can focus entirely on your writing, Pursue your artistic dreams without worrying about mundane things like rent and grocery bills. It had seemed like the perfect fairy tale proposal to her 22-year-old self. A successful, established man offering to support her creative ambitions while providing a level of financial security that would allow her to focus entirely on her art. And for the first several years of their marriage, it had indeed felt like living in a fairy tale. Sarah had set up a beautiful writing office in their first home, a charming colonial in West Hartford, complete with built-in bookshelves, an antique oak desk, and large windows that looked out over a garden she had planted with her own hands. But somehow, between hosting David's business associates for elaborate dinner parties, managing their increasingly complex social calendar filled with charity galas and country club events, and maintaining the kind of household that David expected, her writing dreams had gradually faded into the background. The miscarriage 5 years ago had devastated them both, or so Sarah had believed at the time. They had been trying to conceive for several years, and when she finally became pregnant at 37, they had both been overjoyed. David had been supportive and attentive throughout the difficult recovery process, encouraging her to take time to heal both physically and emotionally. He had suggested therapy to help with the depression that followed the loss, had driven her to appointments, and had seemed genuinely concerned about her well-being. But looking back now with the clarity that was slowly returning, as whatever had been affecting her thinking began to wear off, Sarah found herself wondering if David's concern had been entirely genuine, or if he had been calculating and manipulating the situation even then, perhaps already planning for some future scenario where her mental health history could be used against her. This morning, as she had prepared for what she believed was the Thompson family wedding ceremony, David had been unusually solicitous and attentive, almost hovering around her as she got ready. She had overheard him speaking on his cell phone from his home office, his voice carrying the tone of someone coordinating important details. "Everything's set for 3 o'clock this afternoon. Make sure the photographers understand they need to stay completely away from the main church entrance. We can't have any pictures that might surface later." When Sarah had entered his office to ask about their departure time, he had quickly ended the phone call and turned to her with what she now realized had been a forced smile. "Honey, are you ready for the Thompson wedding? I have to say, I still think it's quite strange that they wanted such an unusually private ceremony. I don't even remember you mentioning meeting the Thompson family before, and I thought I knew all of our mutual friends and social connections." David's response had seemed evasive even at the time, though she had dismissed her concerns as pregnancy-related sensitivity. "They're just business associates. Sweetheart, nothing particularly fancy or social about it. You know how some people prefer very intimate gatherings rather than large celebrations?" Something in his tone and body language had made her feel uncomfortable, but she had attributed the feeling to the pregnancy hormones and general anxiety that came with approaching motherhood at the age of 42. "I've been thinking," David had continued, apparently eager to change the subject, "maybe after the baby arrives and you've had time to recover, we should take that extended trip to Europe we've been discussing. Just the three of us, spending a month or two traveling through France and Italy." "That sounds absolutely wonderful," Sarah had replied enthusiastically, though as she tried to recall the conversation, she couldn't actually remember any serious discussions about European travel, despite David's suggestion that they had been planning such a trip. As David's black Mercedes had pulled away from their circular driveway that morning, Sarah had stood in the doorway of their mansion, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, feeling an inexplicable sense of unease about the day ahead. "Something doesn't feel right today, little one," she had whispered to her unborn child, her voice barely audible in the quiet morning air. "Mommy's got a really bad feeling about what's going to happen." But she had dismissed the intuition as nothing more than pregnancy hormones, and the general anxiety that her doctor had assured her was completely normal for women experiencing pregnancy at her age. Dr. Patricia Wilson had explained that older mothers often experienced increased worry and stress, and David had been so understanding and supportive about her concerns, constantly reassuring her that everything would be fine. Now, lying in the hospital bed with intravenous fluid dripping steadily into her arm and medical monitors beeping softly around her, Sarah realized that what she had interpreted as David's understanding and support might have been something entirely different and far more sinister. The way David had started personally bringing her prenatal vitamins every morning, presenting them to her along with a large glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, and often staying to watch while she took them. The subtle but persistent suggestions that she might be developing pregnancy-related anxiety that could benefit from professional treatment. The gentle but continuous encouragement to limit her activities and social interactions, ostensibly for her own safety and the baby's health. Mrs. Martinez. A warm, professional voice interrupted her increasingly troubled thoughts. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Patterson, the attending emergency physician here at Hartford Hospital. How are you feeling right now? Dr. Patterson appeared to be a woman in her early 60s with kind but sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She spoke with a slight Boston accent that reminded Sarah of her favorite college professors, and her manner immediately put Sarah somewhat at ease despite the frightening circumstances. Honestly, I'm feeling confused and scared. Dr. Patterson, I'm not even completely sure how I knew about the wedding I attended today, and there's something about my husband's behavior that's been troubling me, though I can't quite put my finger on what exactly feels wrong. Let's start with some basic medical questions about your pregnancy. Sarah, have you experienced any complications during this pregnancy? How have you been feeling overall during the past several months? I've been incredibly tired, much more exhausted than I remember being during my previous pregnancy years ago. But I assume that was simply because I'm older now, and pregnancy is more physically demanding at 42. And I've been having significant problems with my memory and concentration. I've been losing track of conversations in the middle of sentences, forgetting appointments, having trouble following simple instructions. Dr. Patterson made detailed notes on her electronic tablet, her expression becoming increasingly serious as Sarah described her symptoms. When would you say these cognitive symptoms first became noticeable to you? Probably about 3 or 4 months ago, maybe a little longer. David noticed the changes too, and he became very concerned about my well-being. He started taking charge of making sure I took my prenatal vitamins every day, bringing them to me personally with breakfast. He said he wanted to ensure I didn't forget them due to my increasing forgetfulness. Dr. Patterson's expression grew more grave as she continued taking notes. Sarah, I need to ask you something very important, and I want you to think carefully before answering. Do you have a clear memory of what you had for breakfast this morning? The question seemed somewhat odd given the circumstances, but Sarah tried to focus her still foggy thinking on the morning's routine. David made scrambled eggs with cheese, the way he's been doing for the past few months. He brought me my prenatal vitamins along with a large glass of orange juice. He's been very attentive about my nutrition lately, always making sure I eat a substantial breakfast and take all my supplements. He says he wants to make sure I don't forget anything important in my current condition. Dr. Patterson leaned forward in her chair, her expression becoming much more serious and concerned. Sarah, I have the preliminary results from the blood work we conducted when you arrived, and I need to discuss some very concerning findings with you. The good news is that your baby appears to be healthy and your pregnancy is progressing normally. However, the toxicology screening has revealed some disturbing information about your blood chemistry. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she waited for Dr. Patterson to continue. We found significant levels of benzodiazepines in your system, specifically a medication called midazolam. This is a powerful sedative that's typically used in hospital settings for anxiety disorders and sedation before medical procedures. The levels we detected would require consistent, regular administration over a period of weeks or possibly months. The words hit Sarah like ice water. That's completely impossible. Dr. Patterson, I haven't been taking any anxiety medication or sedatives. I mean, David has suggested recently that I might benefit from seeing a psychiatrist about what he calls my increasing stress and irrational behavior. But I never actually saw a doctor or received any prescriptions for psychiatric medications. Sarah, the levels of midazolam in your blood indicate systematic, regular dosing over an extended period. This medication would need to be administered consistently, probably daily, and most likely by crushing tablets into food or beverages to mask the taste. The implications of Dr. Patterson's words crashed over Sarah like a tsunami of realization. The persistent mental fog, the confusion and memory problems, the way David had been so concerned about her apparent mental health issues lately, his suggestions that she might need professional psychiatric help. Her phone, which had been left in her purse during the collapse at the wedding, began ringing insistently from the bedside table. David's number flashed on the screen repeatedly, but before she could summon the strength to answer, she heard the distinctive sound of a voicemail notification. With trembling fingers that felt disconnected from her body, she accessed the message, expecting to hear David's voice expressing concern for her condition. Instead, she heard a young woman's voice, bright and excited and completely unfamiliar. "Baby, I can't believe we're actually married. I'm still wearing my wedding dress, and I keep staring at my ring. When are you finally going to tell that pathetic wife of yours about us? I'm getting really tired of pretending to be just your assistant when we're around other people. The honeymoon suite at the Marriott downtown is all ready for us, and I packed that sexy lingerie you bought me in Paris." Sononym. The voice was young, enthusiastic, and spoke with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from someone who has never experienced real consequences for their actions. But the words hit Sarah like physical blows, each sentence hammering home the devastating reality of her situation. Dr. Patterson, who had been observing Sarah's face carefully during the phone call, reached over and gently touched her arm. "Sarah, is there someone you trust that I can call to come be with you right now? A family member or close friend who could provide support while we work through this situation?" "My sister Monica," Sarah whispered, her mind still reeling from the voicemail message. "She lives in Manhattan, but she'll come. Monica works as a forensic accountant for a major firm, and she's always been somewhat suspicious of David, though she's mostly kept her opinions to herself over the years." As Dr. Patterson stepped out of the room to give Sarah privacy to call her sister, Sarah stared at the phone in her hands and tried to process the magnitude of what was happening to her life. 20 years of marriage, and she felt like she was learning about her husband for the first time. How long had David been systematically poisoning her, deliberately undermining her mental faculties while presenting himself as the concerned, caring husband? How long had he been planning whatever scheme required her to appear mentally unstable? But more terrifying than the betrayal and the poisoning was the dawning realization of what might have happened if she hadn't collapsed at that wedding ceremony. If David's plan had continued uninterrupted, if the systematic medication had continued for more weeks or months, how much worse could her condition have become? She thought about the beautiful nursery at home, painted yellow for the baby they had supposedly been planning together. She thought about the life insurance policies David had insisted they update recently, his suggestions that they needed to increase the coverage significantly due to their improved financial situation. She thought about the way he had been encouraging her to make him the sole beneficiary of her inheritance from her parents, explaining it as a practical matter of estate planning. 20 years of marriage, and Sarah was beginning to understand that she had never really known her millionaire husband at all. The successful construction executive, the devoted partner, the excited father-to-be, apparently all of it had been an elaborate performance designed to hide something much darker and more calculating. As she waited for Monica to make the drive up from New York City, Sarah stared at the ceiling and wondered how many other wives were living in similar situations right now, being systematically undermined and manipulated by narcissistic husbands who saw them as obstacles to be removed rather than partners to be cherished. For the first time in months, her mind felt clear enough to understand that she was fighting for more than just her marriage or her financial security. She was fighting for her sanity, her freedom, her child's future, and quite possibly her life itself. The sterile smell of hospital disinfectant mixed with the soft beeping of medical monitors filled Sarah's senses as she fully awakened in Hartford Hospital's emergency room several hours later. The persistent medication-induced fog that had been clouding her mind for months was lifting like morning mist, revealing a mental clarity that was both liberating and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Dr. Elizabeth Patterson returned to Sarah's bedside carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the grave expression of someone who had spent the past few hours uncovering evidence of systematic criminal activity. Her deliberate speech pattern and careful choice of words immediately commanded Sarah's complete attention. "Mrs. Martinez, we've completed your comprehensive blood work and toxicology screening, and I need to discuss some extremely concerning findings with you. These results, combined with what you've told me about your symptoms and your husband's behavior, paint a very disturbing picture." Sarah shifted uncomfortably on the hospital bed, her hand moving instinctively to protect her swollen belly, where her unborn child continued to develop despite the toxic environment that had been systematically created around them both. "Dr. Patterson, Please tell me straight out, is my baby going to be okay? That's honestly all that matters to me right now. I'm happy to tell you that your baby appears to be healthy and your pregnancy is progressing completely normally. The fetal heart rate is strong. All the measurements are appropriate for your stage of pregnancy, and there don't appear to be any developmental issues or complications related to your exposure to the medication. Dr. Patterson pulled up a chair beside the hospital bed, settling in for what was clearly going to be a lengthy and serious conversation. However, Sarah, the toxicology results show dangerously high levels of midazolam in your system. This is a powerful benzodiazepine that's typically used in controlled medical settings for sedation and anxiety disorders. The levels we've detected indicate consistent, systematic administration over a period of several months, possibly longer. But doctor, I've told you repeatedly that I haven't been taking any anxiety medication or sedatives of any kind. Dr. Patterson opened her folder and pulled out several pages of laboratory results, pointing to specific numbers that meant nothing to Sarah, but clearly held significant meaning for the medical professional. Sarah, the concentration of this medication in your blood could only result from someone deliberately and regularly giving it to you without your knowledge. Someone would need to crush the tablets and mix them into your food or beverages on a daily basis for months to achieve these levels. The horrifying implications settled over Sarah like a suffocating blanket. The morning routine that David had established, bringing her prenatal vitamins personally along with freshly squeezed orange juice, his sudden concern about her nutrition, and his insistence on preparing her breakfast himself, his growing suggestions that she was developing pregnancy-related anxiety and might benefit from psychiatric treatment. Dr. Patterson, what exactly would this medication do to someone who was receiving it without their knowledge and without medical supervision? At therapeutic doses administered by a physician for legitimate medical reasons, midazolam is used to treat severe anxiety and panic disorders. However, when given at higher doses or administered regularly to someone who doesn't need it medically, it can cause significant cognitive impairment, memory problems, confusion, disorientation, and fatigue. Dr. Patterson flipped to another page in the folder, showing Sarah charts that track the typical effects of benzodiazepine abuse. In cases of systematic poisoning, like what you've experienced, the victim often appears to be suffering from mental health issues. Someone observing from the outside might conclude that the person was having a psychological breakdown, experiencing paranoid delusions, or developing serious psychiatric problems. Sarah felt physically sick as the pieces of David's plan began falling into place with devastating clarity. So someone could use this medication to make it appear that a person was mentally unstable, even if they were completely healthy before the poisoning began. Unfortunately, that's exactly correct. If someone wanted to discredit another person's mental competency or create evidence of psychiatric instability, systematic benzodiazepine poisoning would be an effective method. The phone in Sarah's purse rang again with David's distinctive ringtone. This time she answered, determined to hear what explanation he might offer for his absence from the hospital, where his pregnant wife was being treated for a medical emergency. Sarah, thank God you're awake and feeling better. I'm so incredibly sorry I couldn't come with you in the ambulance earlier. There was an urgent business situation at the wedding that I absolutely had to handle before I could leave. What kind of urgent business situation? David, what could possibly have been more important than accompanying your pregnant wife to the hospital? There was a significant pause on David's end of the line, and Sarah could hear muffled voices in the background, including what sounded like the young woman from the voicemail message. Sarah, honey, you're probably still feeling confused and disoriented from fainting earlier. The doctors probably gave you some medication that's affecting your thinking. You should just rest and try not to process too much information right now. The condescending, patronizing tone in David's voice triggered a cascade of memories about how many times he had spoken to her exactly that way over the past several months. How frequently he had dismissed her concerns, questioned her perceptions, or suggested that her reactions to situations weren't reliable or rational. I'm not confused or disoriented. David, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. I heard the woman in the wedding dress call you by name. I saw how intimately familiar you two were with each other. And I received a very interesting voicemail message on my phone. Another pause. Longer this time. And Sarah could almost hear David's mind racing as he tried to calculate how much she might know and how he could continue to manipulate the situation. Sarah, please. Sweetheart, you're letting your imagination create problems that don't exist. This is exactly the kind of irrational thinking that's been concerning me about your mental state lately. You're seeing conspiracies and romantic relationships where there are just normal business interactions. Dr. Patterson, who had been listening to Sarah's side of the conversation with growing alarm, gently reached over and took the phone from Sarah's trembling hand. Mr. Martinez, this is Dr. Patterson, your wife's attending physician here at Hartford Hospital. I need to speak with you immediately about Sarah's test results. There are some extremely serious medical findings that we need to discuss in person. Sarah could hear David's voice through the phone speaker, but couldn't make out his exact words. However, Dr. Patterson's facial expression grew increasingly stern and disapproving as the conversation continued. Mr. Martinez, your wife has been systematically poisoned with benzodiazepines over a period of several months. This is a serious criminal matter that we're required to report to law enforcement authorities immediately. I strongly suggest that you come to the hospital right now to discuss this situation. When Dr. Patterson ended the phone call, Sarah was trembling with a combination of fear, anger, and something that felt almost like relief at finally understanding what had been happening to her mind and body. He's been deliberately drugging me, hasn't he? Doctor. All those mornings when he was so concerned about my prenatal vitamins, when he made sure I ate a proper breakfast and took all my supplements, he was systematically poisoning me while pretending to be the caring, attentive husband. Sarah, based on the medical evidence and what you've described about your husband's behavior, that appears to be exactly what has been happening. But I need to ask you some additional questions that may be difficult to answer. Dr. Patterson pulled out a new section of her folder, this one containing forms and questionnaires that Sarah recognized as the kind of documentation used in domestic abuse cases. Have you noticed any unusual changes in your husband's behavior over the past year? Any discussions about finances, insurance policies, or your mental health? Any suggestions about limiting your activities or social interactions? The questions opened up a floodgate of disturbing memories that Sarah had previously dismissed or rationalized away. David's insistence on increasing their life insurance policies substantially about 6 months earlier, claiming it was necessary because of the baby and their improved financial situation. His growing suggestions that she should see a mental health professional about what he characterized as her increasing anxiety and irrational behavior. His subtle but persistent discouragement of her maintaining friendships and social connections, always framed as concern for her health and safety during the pregnancy. Dr. Patterson, he's been gradually isolating me and undermining my confidence in my own perceptions for months. And now that I think about it clearly, he's also been taking control of all our financial affairs, telling me that I shouldn't worry about money matters while I'm pregnant and that he would handle everything. Sarah, what you're describing is a classic pattern of systematic domestic abuse designed specifically to undermine a victim's mental competency and social support system. Have you noticed any missing money or unusual financial activity? I honestly don't know. David has been handling all our finances for years, but recently he's been even more secretive about money matters. He says I don't have a head for numbers and that it's easier if everything goes through his office. Dr. Patterson exchanged a meaningful look with someone who had just entered the room, a woman in her 50s with kind but intelligent eyes and a professional but warm demeanor. Sarah, this is Patricia Wells. She's a social worker here at the hospital who specializes in domestic abuse cases. I asked her to join our conversation because what you're experiencing goes far beyond medical treatment. Patricia Wells pulled up another chair and spoke in a voice that managed to be both gentle and authoritative at the same time. Sarah, what you've described to Dr. Patterson represents a systematic pattern of psychological and physical abuse, specifically designed to undermine your mental competency and potentially gain control of your financial assets. This type of calculated abuse often escalates to life-threatening situations. You mean David might actually be trying to kill me? Based on the evidence, it appears more likely that he's trying to have you declared mentally incompetent, possibly through an involuntary psychiatric commitment. With systematic poisoning creating symptoms that mimic serious mental illness, combined with isolation from support systems and control of financial resources, an abuser can build a compelling case for having their victim committed to a psychiatric facility. Sarah felt the room spinning around her as the full scope of David's potential plan began to emerge. But what about the baby? What would happen to my child if I were committed to a psychiatric hospital? If you were declared mentally incompetent, your husband would likely gain full custody of the child and complete control of your financial assets. Depending on how far his plan extended, he could potentially liquidate everything and disappear while you were institutionalized and unable to defend yourself. The phone buzzed again with a text message from an unfamiliar number, but when Sarah opened it, the content made her blood run cold. The wedding ceremony was absolutely beautiful, even with the unexpected drama. Sorry your wife crashed our special day, but I can't wait for our honeymoon in Costa Rica next week. I'm already packed and ready for our new life together. Love and excitement, Mrs. Jessica Martinez. Sarah showed the text message to Dr. Patterson and Patricia Wells, watching their expressions grow more grave as they read the evidence of David's secret marriage and planned disappearance to a country with limited extradition treaties. Ladies, I think we're looking at something much more serious than domestic abuse, Patricia said quietly. This appears to be a systematic plan to steal Sarah's identity, assets, and child while potentially leaving her permanently institutionalized or worse. Dr. Patterson stood up with obvious determination. Sarah, we're going to keep you here at the hospital for continued observation while the medication clears completely from your system. But more importantly, we're going to help you figure out exactly what your husband has been planning and make sure you and your baby are protected. As if summoned by their conversation, they could hear David's voice echoing from the hospital corridor, speaking in the authoritative tone he used when he expected immediate compliance with his demands. Excuse me, I'm looking for my wife, Sarah Martinez. She was brought here by ambulance earlier today, and I need to see her immediately. I'm her husband and I have medical power of attorney. Patricia Wells stood up with a grim smile. Actually, Mr. Martinez, I don't think you do have medical power of attorney anymore. And after what we've discovered about your systematic poisoning of your wife, I think you're going to find that your legal situation has changed dramatically. Sarah looked up at the two women who had literally saved her life by recognizing the signs of systematic abuse that she had been too confused and manipulated to identify herself. What happens now? She asked, her voice stronger than it had been in months. Now, Dr. Patterson said firmly, we protect you and your baby, and we make sure your husband faces the consequences of what he's done. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she was thinking clearly enough to understand that she wasn't just fighting for her marriage or her financial security. She was fighting for her freedom, her sanity, her child's future, and quite possibly her life itself. And with these women standing beside her, she was beginning to believe that she might actually win. While Sarah lay in that hospital bed beginning to understand the true scope of her husband's betrayal, her sister Monica was about to uncover financial evidence that would shatter everything she thought she knew about David Martinez and his supposedly successful construction empire. Monica Rivera had always possessed the kind of sharp analytical mind that made her exceptionally successful as a forensic accountant for one of Manhattan's most prestigious financial investigation firms. At 45 years old, she spoke with a slight New York accent she had acquired during her 15 years living in the city, and she had developed the habit of thinking out loud when working through complex financial puzzles, a trait that had served her well in exposing corporate fraud and embezzlement schemes. When she received Sarah's panicked phone call from Hartford Hospital, Monica immediately knew that her long-standing suspicions about David Martinez were about to be validated in the worst possible way. She had never trusted her brother-in-law, finding his charm too polished, his success story too convenient, and his treatment of Sarah too controlling. Though she had kept most of her concerns to herself over the years to preserve family harmony, Monica made the drive from her Manhattan apartment to Hartford in record time. Her silver BMW cutting through traffic while her mind raced through possibilities, and her hands-free phone system allowed her to make several crucial calls to contacts in law enforcement and financial investigation. Sarah, honey, I came as fast as I possibly could, Monica announced as she burst into the hospital room with her laptop bag slung over her shoulder and an expression of fierce determination on her face. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun that revealed her hasty departure from her office, and she still wore the expensive business suit that had been appropriate for her morning meetings with federal prosecutors. Monica, thank God you're here. I think David has been systematically drugging me for months, and there's evidence that he's been married to his assistant. I don't know what's real anymore. Monica's expression darkened as she listened to Sarah recount the events of the day, from the collapse at the secret wedding ceremony to Dr. Patterson's discovery of benzodiazepines in Sarah's blood. When Sarah played the voicemail message from Jessica, Monica's hands clenched into fists and her voice took on the cold, analytical tone she used when building cases against financial criminals. "That narcissistic son of a bitch," Monica muttered, then caught herself and apologized for her language. "Sorry, Sarah, but this is exactly the kind of systematic abuse I was worried about all these years. I should have pushed harder when I noticed red flags about his behavior and business practices." Dr. Patterson and Patricia Wells briefed Monica on the medical findings and their legal implications, explaining the systematic nature of the poisoning and the evidence suggesting a comprehensive plan to undermine Sarah's mental competency. Dr. Patterson, in your professional opinion, how long would someone need to plan something this elaborate? This level of manipulation and systematic abuse doesn't happen overnight. Based on the medication levels in Sarah's system and the symptoms she's described, I would estimate this has been going on for at least 3 to 4 months, possibly longer. The systematic nature suggests months of advanced planning. Fortunately, Monica opened her laptop and began connecting to secure servers that would allow her to access the kind of financial databases and investigation tools that weren't available to the general public. "Sarah, I need you to give me access to any financial information you can remember. Bank account numbers, investment accounts, insurance policies, anything that might help me trace what David has been doing with your money." "Monica, I don't have passwords or access to any of our financial accounts. David always said I didn't have a head for numbers and that it would be easier if everything went through his office. He's been handling all our finances for years, but recently he's been even more secretive about money matters." Monica's expression grew grim as she recognized another classic pattern of financial abuse. "Sarah, you have a college degree in English literature. You're perfectly capable of understanding financial matters. When someone tells you that you're too stupid to manage money, that's usually because they're stealing it." While Sarah rested, Monica began her forensic investigation using every resource available to her through her professional connections and her years of experience in tracking hidden assets and fraudulent financial activity. "Let me see what your millionaire husband has really been doing with your family's money," Monica said, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed databases that most people didn't even know existed. What Monica discovered in the first hour of investigation made her stomach turn, and her professional instincts scream warnings about the scope of David's criminal activity. "Sarah, you need to wake up and see this immediately. What I've found is much worse than simple adultery or even systematic poisoning." Sarah stirred as Monica pulled up bank statements and financial records on her laptop screen, the evidence of David's crimes displayed in neat columns of numbers that told a devastating story. "Honey, David has been systematically transferring large amounts of money out of your joint accounts and moving it to locations where you can't access it. Look at these withdrawal patterns." The bank statements showed a consistent pattern of transfers over the past 18 months, $50,000 here, $75,000 there, always in amounts just under the thresholds that would trigger automatic bank notifications or require additional authorization. "Where is all that money going?" "Monica, that's what I've been trying to trace, and what I'm finding is absolutely criminal." Monica clicked to another screen showing property records and rental agreements. "Sarah, David has been paying rent on a luxury apartment in Stamford, Connecticut. The lease shows a payment of $60,000, paid 6 months in advance. An apartment? Why would David need a separate apartment when we have the house in Westport?" Monica's voice was grim as she continued clicking through financial records. "I think we both know why he needed a private apartment, but let me show you what else I've discovered." Over the next 2 hours, Monica systematically uncovered a financial trail that painted a picture of comprehensive fraud and systematic deception that went far beyond simple marital infidelity. A joint bank account with Jessica Palmer that had been established 14 months ago and had been receiving monthly transfers of $25,000 from David and Sarah's marital assets. Life insurance policies on Sarah that had been increased to $5 million just 6 months earlier, with David listed as the sole beneficiary and Jessica Palmer listed as the secondary beneficiary in case something happened to David. Medical consultations with 3 different psychiatrists over the past 4 months, where David had discussed his concerns about his wife's declining mental health and increasingly erratic behavior, and had inquired about procedures for involuntary psychiatric commitments. Pharmaceutical records showing David's purchase of unmarked benzodiazepines from an unlicensed online source, with shipping records indicating regular monthly deliveries to a post office box registered under a false name. Monica, this is impossible. David built Martinez Construction from his father's company. We've been wealthy for years. How could he need to steal money when he's already a millionaire? Monica's face was pale as she turned her laptop screen towards Sarah, displaying financial records that would destroy everything Sarah believed about her husband's success and their family's financial security. Sarah, I've been digging deep into Martinez Construction's financial records using my professional access to corporate databases. David hasn't been building wealth, he's been systematically stealing it. The construction company is completely bankrupt and has been operating as a Ponzi scheme for at least 2 years. That can't be right. His father started that company decades ago, and David has built it into one of the most successful construction firms in Connecticut. No, sweetheart, I've traced the corporate records back to their origins. David's father's original construction company went bankrupt 22 years ago, right around the time you and David got married. David essentially stole the company name and reputation to create his own criminal enterprise, built on borrowed money and fraudulent contracts. The room seemed to spin around Sarah as she tried to process this information. Everything she had believed about their life, their financial security, and David's professional success had been built on lies and criminal activity. Patricia Wells returned with Detective Amanda Rodriguez from the Hartford Police Department, a stern-looking woman in her early 40s who specialized in financial crimes and domestic abuse cases. Mrs. Martinez, I understand your sister has uncovered some concerning financial activity that may be related to your husband's systematic poisoning. Can you walk me through what you've discovered? Monica turned her laptop toward Detective Rodriguez and began presenting her findings with the professional competence that had made her one of the most respected forensic accountants in the Northeast. Detective, what we're looking at here is a systematic financial fraud operation that includes embezzlement from employee pension funds, insurance fraud, and what appears to be a comprehensive plan to murder Sarah or have her permanently institutionalized while stealing her assets and custody of her child. Those are serious accusations. What evidence supports your conclusions? Monica pulled up a complex spreadsheet that tracked money flows between multiple accounts and business entities. David Martinez has been operating what's known as a shell game construction fraud. He would bid on municipal projects, collect advance payments from cities and towns, then use that money to pay off debts from previous projects while never actually completing the work he was contracted to perform. Detective Rodriguez studied the financial records with obvious professional interest. How long has this been going on? Based on what I can trace, at least 2 years, possibly longer. But it gets much worse. David has been stealing money from his construction company's employee pension fund to support his personal lifestyle and finance his relationship with Jessica Palmer. How much money are we talking about? Monica's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she delivered the devastating news. Detective, David Martinez has stolen approximately